advantages, sorry, and disadvantages of that include that it's the purest form of democracy. There's less corruption, obviously, because it's harder to corrupt a whole country again. It means that people are regularly being asked questions and regularly educating themselves on these questions if they're actually going to vote. It also arguably can motivate people to vote more because there's less wasted votes. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later, but the UK, in the system that we have, first past the post, a lot of votes are actually wasted and ignored. So that leads to a lot of people saying, well, I live in a constituency where most people vote Conservative, so why am I going to vote Labour? It's useless. So that is, again, lower turnout, and it just means that there's more apathy. Whereas in a direct democracy, it's a proportional vote on these actions, so people actually feel like they're being listened to in that vote. It means that by holding constant referendums and initiatives, it means that controversial issues can be passed. So an example of that would be, I don't know, it was only until, 2010 that the UK actually passed same-sex marriage, which is a very controversial issue, but it took them that long to actually hold this vote. Whereas if we would have had a referendum, people could have just been asked, and they would have said yes or no. You can also argue that by having the people vote on these issues, on these political changes or possible political changes, this action receives more legitimacy. So when Switzerland voted to not change from a nuclear power source, or phase out nuclear power energy, it means that has more legitimacy. But the disadvantages now of direct democracies can also be quite prominent. So the first one I would say is that by constantly asking people, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? People become bored and they don't have the time either to participate. So it can lead to a lower voting turnout. So that 2016 Swiss referendum that I keep mentioning actually only had a 45% turnout, which is extremely low. That's half of the eligible voting population. What's also important to note is that by constantly you only can ask really yes or no questions in referendas, and that means that they're inflexible. People can't really express their political opinion. They can just say yes or no to a certain constitutional change or a certain law. And it's also important to note that the wording of referendums can also be very misleading in certain aspects. Of course, I don't have an example of that right now. Probably should find one. But if something is asked, an example in a more historical point of view, I know that Hitler obviously held referendas, and because of that, referendas are now banned in Germany because of this. But he held referenda, which were quite misleading for the public to understand, and so of course they voted in a way that he would have liked. You can still say that people are relatively uneducated when it comes to politics, so their vote will therefore be uneducated. And close results, for instance, the EU referendum, can actually still lead to a high degree of dissatisfaction with the democratic system.